Good evening and thanks for coming. This is our first peer-to-peer forum, and it's interesting that the topic is one that's near and dear to me, so I decided to start with it, and I was stunned to find over 100 people trying to get in on the call. It's pretty great that this many people are interested in this. Because we have an hour and possibly up to 100 people here, we did send you a checklist of how things need to work. We have to modify that just a little bit. But I want to introduce myself. I'm Lee Webster, and our moderator is Kim Adams, who is a pal of mine. We work together in a lot of different ways, and she's great at managing the back end of Zoom for us. So she'll be the person who's putting the brakes on, keeping the noise down, and also helping to make sure that you get heard by trying to sort of manage who gets to speak next so that we're not tripping all over each other. What we at the Green Burial Council are looking for with this call are really three things. First is encouraging everyone to see each other so that we all know we're not alone. A lot of us are working in silos and we're trying to bring you all into the big barn. The other thing is that we want to get these conservation burial cemeteries started. We want to get the conversation started around it, and then try to find ways to assist you in connecting to each other and also to making next steps happen. So what we're going to be trying to do is capture some of your burning questions and your comments as we go along here. One of the best ways to do that, we are recording, so you're going to be able to take a look. You're going to push that button, right, Kim? Excellent. And we want to make sure that we have captured everything so that we can start building webinars and materials specific to meet your questions and concerns, so we can start moving things forward in a more comprehensive way. So three things. One is be respectful. Second is to be brief, because there are a lot of us on here. And third is to, if you could, write your question or your comment on chat so that Kim can call on you. And feel free to share observations, questions, concerns, just enough so that we know who you are and what you want to get across. So I'm going to stop talking. This is the best part for me. I get to talk for 2 minutes and then I'm done. But I want to open things up by introducing you to the founders of conservation burial in the United States. We have Kimberly and Billy Campbell from Ramsey Creek Preserve, who've been in business at the conservation level for 22 years. And I'm going to get them to just open up and tell us what conservation burial is so we have a place to start. So Billy and Kimberly, thanks for coming on the call. It's yours. You got to unmute yourself down on the lower left-hand side. Or Kim can unmute you. There you go.
I guess we're there.
Excellent.
All right. So conservation burial, what is it? Basically, it's green burial that serves a higher conservation purpose, both in terms of significant land protection, but also in terms of connecting people to natural areas in a very deep and durable way. Getting back to what green burial is, that's just what you don't do. It's more no vaults, no embalming, no fancy metal caskets, etc. It's not wasting those resources, but you could do that on a half an acre of land that has no higher conservation purpose. I mean, you could do it in the middle of a Walmart parking lot, a soil island for that matter. Conservation burial, though, is green burial in a way that actively protects and ecologically restores significant natural areas. So it's more than just green burial in a natural area, even in a natural area if it's a small one.
$9, right?
Yeah.
So I said, fine, I get 25%, so it's like $7.50 off. Fine. I get to the cash.
Okay.
Thanks. Keep going, Bill.
Yeah. Conservation burial is science-based, utilizing the sciences of conservation biology and restoration ecology. For example, issues as far as site selection would be things like size, restorability, position, and landscape. So again, it's science-based on multiple levels. That's just an example. Importantly, these projects cannot degrade the natural area. We don't waste land. We're trying to turn this idea that cemeteries waste land on its head, that we actively restore and protect significant natural areas. Conservation burial grounds actively work with and enter into legally binding agreements with land trusts and other organizations that are concerned with the big picture with landscape level conservation efforts. And that's important to ensure there's not this tyranny of small decisions where you start out with good intentions, but as the years and decades roll on, you make little compromises and you end up with something that's really less than conservation burial and that actually degrades the property. But by entering into an agreement with an outside organization that holds that right to inspect you and basically keep you honest, that ensures the long term for these projects. Most of our projects try to be more than just a cemetery. And by that, I mean, they're places where sure you bury people, but also we have educational opportunities, hiking, we have weddings, also baby blessings, bird watching, et cetera. So again, it's more than just a more natural version of a contemporary cemetery. It's really something else entirely different. I mean, it's a pretty simple idea, but it does have a lot of moving parts, and it's a lot more difficult to implement than you might think. And no two projects are the same. They've got to be site specific and situation specific to ensure success. So again, it comes down to making sure that the projects actively save and ecologically restore significant natural areas for human communities.
Wonderful. Hey, Kimberly, what do you have to add to that?
I think one of the things as we kind of move forward, it's important to think of these spaces not necessarily being cemeteries. I realize that sort of seems counterintuitive because that's a function of it, but perhaps it doesn't need to be the overall. There's a danger in using that word and the associations that go along with that word and the expectations in our modern culture that go along with that word. So we almost need a new language that goes along with conservation burial that opens up people's minds to a different sense of community about death and dying and the ritual and kind of changing that whole perspective. And it's tied in with ritual, with the land. I mean, I think the whole thing of as we plant somebody back in the earth, the way that that regenerates life in other ways.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. I'm not seeing anybody on chat, so I'm just going to do a couple calling on some folks, put some people in the hot seat. We also have Freddie Johnson here from Prairie Creek, and I pointed out Laura Starkey from Heartwood Preserve. Trying to think who else we have on right now from Conservation Burial Cemeteries, but why don't Freddie and Laura, why don't you take a stab too for a minute, and then we'll get right to the chat. Laura, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's such a cool thing to see so many faces up here and some names without faces, but representing people. Yeah, Heartwood Preserve we just had our 3rd birthday. And it was about 7 years in the making for us to get from when I was first starting a business plan to when I opened the doors and got our license. So for a number of reasons that I couldn't have predicted, but that it would take that long. But so everyone's going to have different things that will take them a long time. Mine was site specific to circumstances, but I just wanted to point out that there are different models. You're going to learn about different models of how to go about this. we are not a nonprofit organization, so there are ways to do it that's not a nonprofit organization, and I'd be happy to talk with anybody at some point about why we had to make that, why we made that decision to go that route. So there's also different kind of like in state by state. In Florida, we have there's kind of two branches of cemetery licensing, exempt and non-exempt. So Freddie at Prairie Creek went exempt cemetery direction, and we went non-exempt cemetery direction. So he and I are both two different, successful, but like just very different models in terms of the structure of the place, of the operation. So I'll just point that out since we're talking on the starting it up kind of category of things. So I'll hand it over to Freddie now.
That's great. Thanks, Laura.
Well, I think I can just maybe elaborate on the things that Laura said and Kimberly and Billy. I'm reading that my connection is unstable. I think that means more than just personally, but
We can hear you just fine, Freddie.
okay, that's comforting, at least on the conference call part. So it just what Billy said and Kimberly said, talking about the fact that that there is a lot of difference and a lot of flexibility. There's not like one sort of rule or way with conservation burial from our experience so far. And to confirm what Laura was saying, there's all these different models that are being discovered. But there's also all of these things that we've learned from collaboration with our rather new alliance, Conservation Burial Alliance, that there are certain things that are very important that have sort of proved themselves to be a part of conservation burial that is indeed probably should be in common. So and you know, some of those things are, I think, true for a lot of just natural burial choices, and that speaks to, I think, what Kimberly was speaking of is just the whole thing in our culture about, you know, in my mind, death. And I see Bodie B is here, he could speak to it as well, but this is really natural burial and to a great extent conservation burial. And the fact that it is all about the cycle of life and brings us back to nature is a great, in my view, is a great opportunity. And it is happening very in a small way, but growing way, that the whole death culture really has an opportunity to evolve. And that's exciting to me, because I can see where in the future there's a possibility where a whole community looks at death differently and finds ways to make sure that people get the choices they want and not base those choices necessarily on how much money they have, but find a way as a community that those choices get made, and recognize that things like conservation burial, green burial have to offer as a choice, and how it is can be extended to the whole community, in fact, the whole planet. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, that's great, Freddie. Thanks. Jim Holman, would you talk about your question? You had popped in here and introduced yourself.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just had a question. I'm in the early stages of purchasing land in Vermont, and I'm wondering, when you choose to partner with a land conservation entity, what are the aspects of that choice that you feel are important before you go and introduce yourself to try to partner with them?
Do one of our conservation folks want to take that up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to look at the track record, how long they've been around, how much land have they protected, et cetera. You know, there are some some maybe aren't all that, they're new, but they haven't saved that much property, they don't have that much experience. It's pretty easy, like in Vermont, speak to that, but there are some older organizations. I know that we work with an organization that saved tens of thousands of acres in South Carolina. I know that the guys in Tennessee are working with the Nature Conservancy. I think that's what's important is the track record, that it's not just a, look how long they've been around, how much land they've saved, et cetera.
Right.
One.
Okay.
Hey, Ed, did you have something to add to that?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I wasn't muted. Sorry about that.
You can talk. I'll let you talk this time, Ed.
I'm trying to figure out the Zoom thing here right now.
Okay, we'll let you work it out.
All right, thanks.
Anybody have anything to add to that question or
Yeah,
answer?
if I can just add, I think having a land trust, if your land conservation entity is a land trust, look to see if they're accredited by the Land Trust Alliance. That's the main biggest land conservation land trust organization in the country, and they have accreditation that's pretty rigorous. And so it's a pretty big deal to get accredited. If they're not accredited, it doesn't mean they're not worthy, but that's definitely, it's accreditation. So that's something right there. And I believe that with conservation easements, you can also have a backup, plan for your, should this land trust entity X that we're donating this easement to fail, then the backup, should go to, fill in the blank, the county or the
Exactly.
Our
backup routes.
Upstate Forever is backed up by the Nature Conservancy, so that's their backup plans.
Great. Holly Blue Hawkins is on the call here too. Holly, you want to speak to your question? Glad to see you. We have to unmute you. There you go.
Glad to be here. Thank you. Yeah. I've been hearing some talk about exempt and non-exempt entities, and I'm curious what the distinction is, and also if that distinction varies from state to state. I'm out here on the West Coast and very interested in working with religious organizations, particularly Jewish. That's my heritage, and so we're basically inherently green, other than the traditional monumentation, and that seems like a very good entry point for me. So I'm curious, does the exempt, non-exempt have to do with religious versus commercial entities? That's a new term to me.
No, I don't think it does necessarily. I think you can be a religious entity and have a non-exempt cemetery. My understanding, and Freddie can chime in on this, but in Florida, exempt means you're exempt from the same constrictions of licensing requirements than non-exempt. So Freddie's exempt, I'm non-exempt. In my case, we had to put up a trust fund for perpetual care and maintenance trust fund, and we had to just jump through a few more hoops to prove ourselves than possibly an exempt cemetery had to do. But also it allows us to sell pre-need. That's the main distinction, I believe, is that it's more expensive up front to get to that license, but it allows us to be able to pre-sell. And I know that there are other religious based cemeteries that pre-sell, so I don't think that it's based on that. But Freddie, can you refresh me on any of the other reasons that the differences between exempt and non-exempt, besides
Sure.
selling pre-planning versus at need?
Sure, there's very much, this is a state by state issue, and it's going to vary, but just I think most of the states, if they have a category of exemption from statutes, those exemptions are probably going to be based on things like Laura just mentioned, of having license to pre-sell, having the license to take folks' money before death. So like with Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery and the Florida statutes, they have different categories of exempt cemeteries. And the category that we fit in is called a nonprofit community cemetery. Or even if we call it burial ground, that's still the category we have to fit in. So what that does in terms of advantages as a choice, and Prairie Creek chose those advantages because we needed to open up as quickly as possible for several reasons. And in order to do that, we could choose as a nonprofit organization and as a community cemetery, we could make that choice relatively quickly and open relatively quickly, and we're giving up the advantage of being able to take money before death. So that's what we did. Other categories are, as you mentioned, the religious category. There's also a municipal or government entity category. So, and as I said, all of these things are going to be a little bit different from state to state, but you might find some similarities as well. I don't know if, does that help?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thanks. I'm just trying to navigate the terms. So
yeah,
now that you describe it, I know what you're talking about vis-a-vis the state of California. So thank you very much for that.
Sure. Yeah, what gets a little tricky is figuring out, you know, as someone that wants to start a conservation burial ground, is figuring out, you know, which you want to be, and what, in order to do that, you have to understand the statutes and the advantages and disadvantages, and then match it up with what your group or organization or whatever of what your objectives are. And because if you line it up inappropriate with your objections and what you want to be and do, then that could be problematic. But if you line it up with, you know, you're okay with these things, then you just start off knowing what your limitations are. And, you know, for us, one thing we quickly recognized, if we can't pre-sale, in fact, Kimberly and Billy said, hey, if you can't pre-sale, you've got to be able to give some folks some solace or some feeling of that, the fact that they can have a plan, because that's important. So we developed what we call burial preference forms, and that's a planning tool that we don't have to take someone's money, and we can still let them know that they have a general place for the future in Prairie Creek. And so we just worked out a way to do that most people are quite happy with.
Cool. I want to bring in, if I could, Willowit Branch. And I'm not sure who's on the call for Willowit. Wonder if you can unmute and introduce yourself.
I'm going to unmute and see if you can you hear us?
We can hear you. Yeah, please introduce yourself. I wanted you to speak because you are going through this process right now, and some of these questions seem pertinent. Do you want to explain to people where you are and where you are in the process?
Sure. We're just outside of Oregon, and I'm Suzanne Willow and my wife, Lenita Witt, and we've owned the land for 34 years, and we have our county approval, and we don't have bandwidth to be able to do any video, but we're way out in the country, and we are just finishing Oregon mortuary and cemetery licensure. And the problem we're finding is that I don't think Oregon opens very many cemeteries, and the directions for setting up an endowment trust fund are very, very circular. So we've just found a trust bank that I believe can set that up. That's been a bit of a stop for us. we're going to open early this next year.
Wonderful. And you are at the conservation level then? You have a conservation entity involved?
We will be.
Mhm.
Excuse me. The Southern Oregon Land Conservancy is an old conservation, a long-standing conservation trust, and one of the women who works with them is actually our botanist, and so we still have a mortgage on our land, and so we need to complete paying off the mortgage to a certain point before the land trust can step up and take first. So we're going to be halfway in between. We're going to, we're calling ourselves a natural burial ground, and heading for conservation entity as soon as we can. And they're working with us. They just can't do it while the bank still owns enough of our land.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. That's big help in the conversation. I think,
Thank
Bill Gupton, are you in sort of a similar situation? You just need to unmute yourself on the bottom.
Figure out how to unmute myself.
There you go.
We're in Ohio, and legally and technically we have just been certified as and licensed as a church/religious/benevolent cemetery, which is nonprofit and exempt from many of the code regulations related to cemeteries in our state. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, often when I talk to people about this, one of their first questions is, do I have to be affiliated with some kind of religious organization?
You certainly don't have to.
You don't have to, but what are the advantages and
Well, our advantages included being exempt from the $50,000 endowment requirement. So we're choosing to set up in our policies internal endowment requirement, but it's not a state requirement for us. And there are very few, there's only 3 or 4 sentences in the whole Ohio code about cemeteries. The main benefit legally for our status is the lack of a requirement of a perpetual care fund.
Okay, good. That's really helpful, Bill. Thanks. I want to get caught up on some of the questions that have been coming in. Susan Greer, do you want to speak to your question?
Hi. I'm from the Natural Burial Association here in Toronto, and there's a, to be honest, I approached a quarry. I phoned this quarry and I said, what do you do with your land once you finished with it? And I said, you know, what about making it a natural burial? Of course, never anticipating that that would fly with him. But this is 2 months later, and this guy is really serious, and he's gone to his town council, and he's got 2 councillors that are like, yes, this is a great idea. But my question is to, I think, further to Kimberly and Billy's point, is that I want it to, because it's going to be the first standalone in Ontario, I want it to really raise the bar so that there's nobody that comes in with a standalone that bastardizes the brand, so to speak, that the integrity of a true conservation burial ground is maintained. But this guy, talking to him on the phone yesterday, he was saying, yeah, I should explain, it's really high up in what's called our escarpment. You can see for miles. You can probably on a clear day see across Lake Ontario to Buffalo. And he wants to have this a tower there, so people can climb a tower, and a little parking lot because there's near a trail, and so people could stop. They suddenly have a parking lot to go to the trail. And I started to think, well, wait a minute. I understand that it's great if you could take it beyond the old-fashioned idea of a cemetery, but I'm starting to think, well, wait, this is no longer a sanctuary to the dead. To me, it seems if you've got a tower and Johnny and Katie are squabbling about running to the top of the tower, and the tower is taking you to look outwards, not inwards. So I'm wondering if Kimberly and Billy, am I wrong in my thinking there? Am I thinking too myopically? Should I?
I think this is a fascinating point that you bring up, and certainly in developing these places, I think, first of all, ultimately is this kind of sense of respect for the dead and what that means. But, you know, I think about churchyards in Europe that are hundreds and hundreds of years old, that go back to the 1100s and you know, and that period of time, that are tourist attractions in and of themselves. I look at historical cemeteries that have incredible history that go along with them, that are tourist attractions. I think we can use the word tourist attraction, you know, sort of something where somebody can go bird watching or do something. A lot of times we are, if we're looking for different types of funding, and this depends on the project. And this is why in some ways it's so frustrating with laws being so different with each state, with each country. I mean, you're up there in Toronto, so there's probably even different laws. I mean, you can see even the way that we're talking with the guys in Florida and Ohio, you know, there's different laws. It's very frustrating. But I think there's something, this whole thing about community involvement as well.
But there is a thing though, and we've worried about it in more urban situations like the Monastery of the Holy Spirit when we were working with them, that we didn't want there to be, and there was a bike trail that goes almost right to it, that at some point, if there's a threshold that you might consider visitor management, visitor caps, et cetera, that you could be overwhelmed enough by visitors in an urban situation where it would degrade the natural experience. And the Nature Conservancy and some of their projects only allow X number of visitors a day, whether it's 400 or 100 or 200 or whatever it is. They do have a visitor cap, and we said you might. Monks were very sensitive to the idea that they didn't tons and tons and tons of folks out at the monastery. So the idea with them for visitor management in an urban context was important. And there are there conservancy projects that do limit the number of visitors each day.
It's like,
so
sometimes they're only open certain days of the week and they're closed other days. Or you have in your visitor management policy, you have certain types of visits for days, and then where it's more open for other people to come in. So this is where there's, this is, as we've said before, this is not like opening a Domino's pizza, franchise where that truck drives up and, there's nothing there. And then 3 days later, it's all there and it's the same thing. Every project really is different.
So the bird watchers come along at the time of an interment and it's all good?
Well, actually, what we did, there's redundancy of trail, so you can actually close off. It's trail design as well. And if people come up, there's a service going on. But if they're there, see someone comes to visit their mom and they've driven from North Carolina, because we have people from all over the country, New York, California, South Florida, buried at Ramsey Creek. And so they don't always call ahead of time and ask. So we do try to accommodate people. But just, again, if there's a redundancy of trails in the trail system, it is possible for people to still have that privacy and other people to use the project. And again, having a larger project helps. If you've got 15 acres, that's really hard to accommodate. We're up to almost 80 acres now and would like to have larger. We have a mile of creek frontage, so we can accommodate more visitors and people can still find places of solitude. We try to create special places for people to sit that are surrounded by vegetation where they can be by themselves. So a lot of that can come down to trail design and layout, et cetera.
The other thing that when I take people for a walk through Ramsey Creek and they're trying to decide on where they want somebody to bury their loved one, most of our acreage is wooded. We have some open areas. But one of the things I tell people is the individual spot is important, and there are definitely, when we go hiking through nature, there are certain places that speak to us more. But really, the entire acreage is a memorial to the people who are buried there. And bigger context, that you are looking at this as a larger landscape thing. This is not like going to a contemporary cemetery where you drive up on the road, the paved road, and you take your car as close as you can to the place where that person is buried, and you sort of, you know, change out the flowers or whatever. This is a completely different experience. And I realize that different preserves might be set out in different ways, but as Billy says, there is a way of redundancy of trails and handling visitor management. But it's very important to have a clear goal before you begin, with clear standards and guidelines for your visitors and for your clients, because, you know, you'll have a lot of friends who come to you and then it's like, well, I want a bench by mama. Well, you know, and then I want a bench in front of my child's grave. And how do you manage that? How do you stop, as Billy said, the tyranny of small decisions?
Right.
There's a project in Florida, by the way, that has a fire tower that he moved, and he spreads ashes. He's a little eccentric. I like him a lot, but he does have a fire tower, and there are owls, they're nesting in it now. So he has, you know, it was no fire tower that he moved to his property in the Panhandle.
I won't go up there. I'm terrified of heights. But.
That's great. Well, we can talk more about this topic, I think, in another small group, which is another thing that we're hoping to offer you as we move along here, finding people who are interested in having small group discussions. This is definitely a topic I think we ought to keep going with at some point. I do want to get back to some of the people who are asking questions. Teresa Hughes, would you come on and ask your question, please?
Hello.
There you are.
Oh,
nice
great.
to see you in person.
Oh, thank you. I'm completely new to this, although quite honestly, I thought the whole idea up all by myself until I found that there's hundreds, if not thousands of people involved. I've been thinking about this virtually my whole life, since experiencing a family member's death as a young person and feeling like it was very poorly and inappropriately handled. I'm at the very beginning of this process. I really have a lot of questions. I'm in California. I've spoken a little bit with someone from the Sonoma County Land Trust, because I think in my imagination, a land trust might be a good partner. I really just would love to find out more information about where to start, what a good point of contact is, and how can I go to the land trust with some appropriate information that they may want to know. Really, I'm just looking for a starting point. So I'm open to any and all conversations about that.
Okay, well, let me tell you where the GBC is on that. We have several documents that walk you through the process, the general process. So it would be good to start there. There's a page on the website called "So You Want to Start a Green Burial Cemetery." Right. That would be the one to start with. And you'll also find at the bottom of that page, specific to conservation burial, a list of questions to go through. And that's sort of the assessment tool that was prepared for us by Heidi Hannapel and Jeff Maston of Land Matters, which is a conservation burial consulting firm in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina.
North Carolina, okay.
So
okay.
It's start with those things, and another place I would send you is to Holly Blue Hawkins right there in California that you just saw on the line. Holly also does some consulting and is California friendly, so it's a good place to start. And
okay.
there are a couple of not conservation level but other cemeteries in Sonoma that are not on fire.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We do have that.
You do have that. But I say that would probably be the best answer to your question right now, rather trying to get into the weeds of what happens in your local, your backyard, because, like politics, cemeteries are local.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's why I was really looking for a point of contact right here in my county. And I also didn't know if it was, I'm sure it's county specific, and then I'm sure the state comes in on other levels. So
yeah, and I'll send you some more names too.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. And I'm hoping that's helpful for the other people too who think they want to get started. Those are great places to begin. I see Jennifer Phillips, you're asking kind of the same question here. It gives me an opportunity to plug a couple of things, including the GBC website. And that would be another website that just went live, the conservationburialalliance.org. And all of the conservation burial operators in the country have joined together in this group in order to provide support for each other and to try to nail down what some of those models are, because they are all very different. If you go to that website, and it's the full thing, conservationburialalliance.org, you're going to learn about the existing conservation cemeteries in the US, which will help to inform you and get you started. So that's my answer for you. Jennifer, did you have something more you wanted to ask about that?
No, that's great. Unless you have any specific resources in the state of Virginia that you would point me towards. Thank you.
I'll private message you that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, great. Where are we now, Kim? Who have we got?
Lee, I got a couple of private questions from Candace Curry. Candace, do you want to
Yes.
come on? I'll unmute you.
Please.
There we go. Yes, hi everybody. I have been working in Massachusetts for about 10 years trying to create one of these things, and we're having trouble finding land. So we've looked at hundreds of properties, and one thing that's becoming apparent is golf is no longer a preferred sport here in Massachusetts. And so we've actually found 2 defunct golf courses. One of them turned out to be too wet. The soils were going to be too wet. And the second one, it appears somebody else got an offer in on the property before we did. And I'm wondering if other people have, have you all owned your land? Did you raise money from pre-sales to be able to purchase land? And has anybody done anything with state-owned properties and perhaps done some type of trade with a state? I've been told that the states here in Massachusetts, they can't handle all of their state property. So has anybody had experience with any of those things?
Kimberly, were you trying to get on? You have to unmute yourself on the bottom. There you go.
Is John Christian on the call?
No.
The project in Tennessee, Larkspur, they did a lot of raising before they actually found land. They were having the same problem when they started, and did a lot of work in the community, doing things like visiting hospices and giving talks and saying, this is the idea that we've got and that we want, and we want to, to raise money for land, and got a lot of interest that way. That's a backdoor way to it. But I do agree with you. Buying new land or finding new land to preserve is one of the core missions of conservation burial. But like you say, if the state is going to have to give up part of their land, their public land, because they can't afford to do it or to keep it up anymore, this would be an excellent resource. So,
and by the way, Kenyon College actually took a golf course, and they're doing a burial ground, a conservation burial ground at Kenyon College in Ohio.
Yeah.
So that's a good thought. And there are those golf courses around. Don't give up. There might be one
that's not quite so wet.
I've worked with several conservation groups over the years, and almost every one of them, we would be gifted land that was either too small for us, or it wasn't contiguous to property that was really in our mission. And so often land trusts will have land that they're holding because it was gifted, but that they don't really have a purpose for. They're always kind of juggling their land to get the piece that is really the one they want, and they'll use those other lands for leverage. So it's worth it to go to your local land trust and just sort of keep an eye on their inventory. And showing an interest with them is also going to get you familiar with who the players are, so that when it's time, you've already built a relationship. Because if anything, all this is about relationship. You know, relationship of people to the land and relationship of the cemetery owners. And we do have to recognize this is cemetery ownership, even, you know, however we call it, but that with land trust personnel, and those relationships have to be built before we can start worrying about nuts and bolts, I think, in some ways, but that's one way to go. Candace.
Yeah, can I just make a comment about Greenboro, Massachusetts? We are working with 2 different land trusts. Both are just as passionate as we are about having a conservation burial ground. And at one point, a couple of years ago, one of these land trusts showed us an example of this beautiful property, but unfortunately, it was already in trust and it couldn't be used as burial ground. So there seems to be some type of other restriction that we need to be aware of when we work with land trusts to say, don't put it in trust yet. We want to be able to make this also a cemetery. So I wonder if anybody can speak to that.
I wonder sometimes if you say it's a cemetery, if people think this is where it goes along with that word cemetery and the way we think of cemeteries being embalming, vaults, and all of this stuff that doesn't go along with nature. When we are presenting this new form of burial, it really is burial in nature. But I understand, so this is where it becomes confusing. Because essentially what we're doing would fit in perfectly with that. But when you say the word cemetery, it messes with people's minds.
I'd like to move the conversation for a minute here. We just have a few more minutes left. Bodie B., would you like to come on and speak to your point? Be good to hear from another state.
Happy to, and I so appreciate what's happening here. Just to give you a quick background about what we're up to, we're the only we're 501c3 spiritual, educational, and charitable organization. We've been operating Hawaii's only nonprofit and certified green funeral home since 2012. After 10 years of looking now, we have an agreement to purchase 10.5 acres, which for Hawaii is actually pretty big, but it's tiny for most of the rest of you. And we're looking to develop about 6 acres as what is the natural burial ground sanctuary park. So I just wanted to give, for me, there's a number of levels that I want to address with this, and it kind of speaks to what Freddie said originally about what's possible in terms of a bigger picture. So on one level, we're bringing in green and natural burial. On the next level, for me, we're transforming how we as a people care for dead people, and all the pieces that come around how we care for dead people. Then on another level, my work is very much about transforming human consciousness as quickly as possible and integrating a park with a labyrinth and some reflecting ponds and picnic areas and walking trails and a little children's park in terms of bringing life to this place as a dance of life and death, and integrating the dead and our ancestors back into our cultural story. On and on and on. So then we get into this, you brought up amusement park, and actually I look at that as, if this is a transformational opportunity for people to see where the dead and the living are integrating in a beautiful, healthy way, and we'll have a little flower farm where people can pick flowers for the cemetery, et cetera, et cetera. So we're integrating agriculture and public park with natural green burial really as a teaching center. So now, okay, so at what level where's the line? And there is no one line of where that becomes an amusement park, because edutainment is a very powerful thing. And if we want to teach people, we want them to come and see what we're doing. So really, I need a bigger piece of land than 10 acres, but on this 10 acres, we'll develop a whole teaching center that includes integrating everything from children to dead people and a relationship with ancestors and ceremony and ritual. I mean, this is Hawaii, you know. I think about the Dying to Go to Hawaii campaign, you know, and I pictured a little train that's all the cars of the train are caskets. So there's, you know, I think it all can be kept in very sacred ways. It's about the intention and the heart and how we do what we do, and not necessarily what we do. So here we are. Oh, I want to get to what I want to ask while I have your attention, because now we're on after 10 years of finding land, we have this purchase, so we're raising money, but I'm looking for resources in terms of charts and short videos and graphs and images that I can show to the county, that I can show to potential funders and investors. I'm going to now set up half of my store as a showcase. And so I'm wondering if there's a place to go or places to go where I can find big images or charts or comparisons to normal prehistoric cemeteries, et cetera, with what exactly, you know, what we're doing. And I've done my own versions of that, but I'd love to know what's out there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, and I'll be in touch with you, Bodhi, because we need to see what you're working on. The Green Burial Council education side is also working on that, along with research, other types of research, scientific research, and so on. And we're looking for more people to help us put together, do that research and put together those materials, because we need to be flooding the market with different types of information. So I'm glad you brought that up. I also want to just mention, you brought up a really important point. You only have 10 or so acres. Holly Blue Hawkins is asking, is there a minimum optimal size? And someone else is also asking about sizes. And I think I want to come back also about restoration, which is a critical part of the conservation mission here. So I want to come back to and put Billy back on the hot seat about these two ideas. I do want to mention that the Green Burial Council certification group is working now on revising all of the standards that certifications are based on. And that includes a revised idea about how much land is necessary. And that'll be coming out. We're still working on that, and we're working with consultants on that. But Billy, I think you have some better answers about grave density and the amount that's needed, and also about restoration, if you want to take it home with that.
Yeah, and even a smaller project, you can make it more valuable for the larger conservation context. I know that in Hawaii there are a lot of endangered species, plants, animals, etc. And one idea is, if you have a smaller project, that you focus on that habitat or those plants or animals that are special. We have in the Southeast, we have very little native grassland left. One of our projects that we've worked with is a Buddhist Sangha near Asheville. They only have about 13 acres, but they're doing more of a open grassland because that is a very rare habitat. So that's one way of connecting. And there is this idea of eco-revelatory design. I don't know if you've heard about that, but the idea that you, again, you learn by, when you visit, you actually learn something about the local environment. Another idea is, if it's a small project, if you can connect it in some way to a larger project somewhere else. I mean, where you're like a sister project to that, where you're helping to teach about the larger forest. So a small project really can be important. One of the problems with the smaller project is the whole idea of density. If you bury too many people, if you've got a pretty rough site that's been blasted and it's been farmland, you can put a lot more people per acre than if you have a place that's already got a lot of naturalness to it. It's hard to incorporate more burials on a small site if it's already very, very natural. Yeah, if it's wooded, etc. But yeah, the expandability, I don't know if there's opportunity, because again, the project in Asheville had unexpected success, and they're going to pretty soon run out of land if they don't buy some more around them, which is a nice problem to have as far as the burials. Of course, you can have both cremated remains and whole body burial. Most of the projects that we're associated with do both, because some people are going to be cremated in any event. We still think that natural burial is the greener option, but that's also a way of allowing more people to be involved in the project.
What about burial density? Do you want to just touch on that?
Yeah, normally, we talk, again, it depends on how natural the area is. If it's heavily wooded with a lot of sensitive species, you're not going to be able to bury as many people per acre. But if it's, we just recently, within the last several years, bought a pine plantation that had been bulldozed. We can put 200 plus people per acre there easily and do ecological restoration. Our old site was very diverse with lots of endangered species, et cetera. And so we're only doing about 50 people per acre in the old section as far as whole body burial. So again, that really depends on the site.
Right. Wow. Great. All right. Thanks, Billy. I know you all have lots more questions, and I'm hoping that at some point we'll be able to get you all back together again. I have one more burning question that I want to answer. I hope you've all been keeping up with the chat, because there have been some really interesting additional answers and questions on here. But the one that I'm going to answer right now is about what's next. And let me tell you this. We'll be scheduling more of these calls at different levels, at hybrid cemetery levels and natural burial levels as well, but also more in depth having to do with conservation in smaller groups, so that we can chat a little bit more. We also just opened today a Facebook room specifically for those people who are on this call, and any of your friends who couldn't make the call. So if you go to Facebook and go to Green Burial Council Peer Forum, you're going to find a closed group just for us, so that you can be continuing the conversation and continuing, making networking and creating relationships with people who are on the call, who are interested and can answer some questions for you. So another thing that I want to announce to you is that we had to make a change to our conference, our first ever Green Burial Conference. And we're pleased that we had to, actually, because we've moved to a new space and a new time that is going to be, I think, more meeting our needs even better. And everyone can get there. We're going to be in Chaska, Minnesota, right back where some of us were about 3 weeks ago together. And we're going to go back there because the food is phenomenal. And the beds are really comfortable, and the meeting spaces are wonderful. So look on your calendar for the weekend of October 16 through 18. And we already have confirmations from some really big name people in this work that you're going to want to come and meet first in person. So that's what I have for you today. Please go to the Facebook closed room. That's going to give us some ideas about how to help move things forward as well. And we're going to capture what you've written for us and try to get more of these answers out. And please just keep talking and talking to each other. Does anybody else have one more thing they want to get out there? Now you can all unmute and say yay.
Yay!
Hey.
Yay.
There it is.
Fantastic. Let's do it again.
Thanks, everybody.